Hi, my name is Benedict. If you don't know me already, my videos tend to be relatively long. The reason for this is that I try to focus on the why something happens and why you want to do it, and a lot of what you don't want to do. Now this video, I'm going to be walking through some of the final mix decisions, and particularly looking at the mastering process in a track that's somewhat unusual, in that most of you are probably working on EDM or something that's related, like rap or whatever, but one of those kind of bass heavy styles. Whereas I find myself working on a piece where I've actually had to make the opposite decisions. And we'll run through some of that on both sides, but to help you to see why you might make certain decisions and how making some decisions can impact the feel of the track. Now you'll see that in some cases the feel that while what everybody would normally do, the right decisions, actually turn out to be the wrong decisions for this track. So even if you think, oh, I don't like that style of music, this is an uncool track, please watch it and understand, because you can always apply those in your own piece. Also in this I will be looking at the new SKP Sugar Q, which is a little equalizer primarily designed for the mastering bus. It is an unusual little beastie. If you don't get it, it's useless. Once you get it, it's actually super lovely. So let's dive in. I've got this track here which is mixed but not mastered. So we'll just pull up this just so that you can see what I've got in the masters at the moment. Nothing but a cellar gain. I'll actually just turn that down. And I always run with an M-class maximizer, everything set to default but with soft clip on. So this is purely whilst I'm tracking, composing, what have you. If I send something down the path which is bleh, it's not going to blow my speakers. That's the only reason I run this. If I look and I see that there's activity in here as I'm working, I turn my mix down. But there never is, because I've been doing this so long that there just never is. It's bad mixing to be running that hot. So we'll close that down just so you can see what I've got here. Now I've got a sequence, and it's in sections like most of my music. So we start slow, so we've got this piano figure backed by a cello. The piano also has some strings built into it, so they get switched on at this point. And you start to hear the accordion rising. Now these names, again, I'll say, are suggestive. They'll make more sense as the style of the music goes on, but they are suggestive. They are deliberately not samples thereof. So where I say cello, there is no cello. There never was a cello, and nor will there be. If you hear a cello, then I'm not unhappy. But if you're sitting there thinking, oh, but that sounds synthesis, they're like the shittiest samples you could ever use, man, get out of yourself. This is suggestive music. So follow the style of the music and it'll make sense to you. Leave your prejudice at the door. First section. Now this is where it gets interesting. That's surely not like EDM at all. Where'd that come from? Well, where that came from was that I had the piano intro, needed another part, created an instrument which vaguely was flute-like. That's actually done with Subtractor, if you're interested at all, and hadn't worked that out. Liked it, wrote my line, and then realised, gee, this sounds kind of Middle Eastern. Not too unusual for me. I worked out later, as much as I can work this out, that a lot of that was because I was running sort of parallel harmonies. So rather than my melody being based around the root note, which we normally do in, you know, good old white boy rock and roll, I was tending to have my melody sit 3 or 4 tones above. So if my root was C, then my melody was rooting itself on E. It wasn't a deliberate thing, but it's just the way that it worked out, and I like the sound. It's interesting. It's got tons of these little challenging passing moments, which you might call out of tune, but I think is really fascinating. So I ended up with this really interesting mix. That's what I started with. I wanted to add another instrument that was in the chords area rather than another lead partway through making a sound, and I'm thinking, gee, that kind of plays the role of an accordion-like sound. Felt like I needed a rhythmic element to drive it along. I've used CR78 through the rest of this project. This track I had no particular plans, but I didn't want to use the CR78 to back this, because this has got a really interesting sort of ethnic-y sound. It's very interesting, and I did not want to steamroll that, which was, you see, I made lots of decisions because of that. So I then created, well, I had to work out, well, what I want to do. I've seen some medieval type stuff where people are playing these sort of little hand drum type things. They're kind of like a tambourine, only with a skin on them. My parents actually used to have some of these things. And they have a different sound and a different feel. So I went off to Kong, loaded up a lot of the modelling toms, and set about making some sounds. Hello. Not a drum was touched. So a pattern was made there. Next section. This is actually where I started. I started with this big electric piano with the layers. So there's my core melody, which has become what you might think of as my chorus in this sense, not that this is a verse chorus feel. So great big sound, and that's where I brought my CR78 in, my little drum machine sound, because it suits this. We've suddenly switched, oddly enough, from a kind of Middle Eastern medieval sound to a quite 80s kind of sound. So we've got that big DX7 layered sound and a CR78 playing together. Section finishes, so I have to move back a bar simply because I'm using a lot of groove with a lot of slop on it. Just super kooky. The piece is called, if you haven't noticed, the Agri-World Shuffle. So agricultural world. If you watch science fiction at all, you'll know that on Star Trek or Stargate Atlantis or whatever, the people constantly are going to these worlds that are pre-industrial revolution worlds. Even if they've got some high-tech gizmos, they're basically an agricultural and agronomical type world. So they're pre-industrial revolution, and then there's this idea that this is going to be some sort of perfect world where every evening we sit around these long tables and party and drink beer but never get drunk and always behave nicely to one another kind of stuff. It's a science fiction thing. It's part of the story of what I'm working on at the moment. So of course it amused me no end to use the shuffle in the CR78, which you see here, the shuffle. So my character's moving from world to world and noticing that they're all this cliche of agricultural worlds where everybody lives in this sort of medieval kind of state, but they're immensely happy at the same time. Go figure. So So that's the piece. Very simply, that's really all it does. It's just a simple, descriptive tone poem, if you will, as part of my story. But it's an unusual piece in that it's got some elements that belong in more traditional electronic music, but it's got some elements that really belong in New Age or something like that. So how do I mix that? Now, I'll say I started by making all the usual cliche decisions, which were mistakes. I started by making what I've called drum group here, by making that sound as big as I could. Yeah, how it's bigger. So what I actually did, and I don't want to take too much time, but I started by putting in the soft tube overdrive, the freebie thing there, the saturation unit, and pushing it into that with the little light just flickering on, and boy did it sound immense. I mean, we're up in James Horner territory, or even Hans Zimmer territory. How impressive is that? But I'd forgotten what the story of my piece was. The story of my piece was medieval. Medieval drums did not sound big. They might if you're watching Pirates of the Caribbean, but they don't sound big in the real world. They're much more focused on the sound of the skin and the shell of the drum, not the great big taiko kind of thing. And I've heard taiko from a couple of 100 meters, and they don't sound as big as they do on movies either. So I started to create that immense sound, and it sounded really cool. Not only did it drown the mix, but I could find solutions for that. But I then, especially when I went and played it off on my Landroom system, that's not real strong in the upper mids, very flattering to music and movies, the sub in particular, but you lose a lot of those very, very minute details. And so you lose a lot of that. And when I'm listening to it back, I'm going, oh yeah, it sounds great, I'll listen to the sub, but it doesn't feel medieval anymore. And that was the whole point of the piece. So, back I came, re-EQ'd, rolled off a fair amount of those lows, and put the emphasis on hearing the skins and the tappy stuff, rather than the oop, oop, oop stuff. If you're making techno, by all means, you're going to make the first decision I made, because that's the way it goes. But the way to point out to you that follow your piece, what's the story of your piece? In my piece, that great big taiko type thing was not what I was after. These are hand drums type things. Now, yes, you can hear sticks on them and everything. I'm not being pedantic about detail, but I'm pedantic about my story. So, interesting mix decision that had to be remade. Now, the mix as you're hearing it at the moment, I have not rechecked. I'll check it, I'll roll it off and check it later. It's the thinking that I'm wanting you to look at, not necessarily whether you like the mix or whether this is a great mix. The thinking is what I'm trying to teach you here. So a different way of approaching what you might normally do, different way of what I would have normally done as well. Same with the accordion. I wanted to bring out that feel of it. An actual sound design trick that I made with this was to create an LFO. Because if you're talking accordion, you're constantly doing this, the damn thing squeezing in and out. They don't have a set static level. So a sustained accordion note is still going volume-wise the whole time because of the squeezy guy. Yes, some guy who's really super superb, Flacco, whoever, at doing this kind of stuff might say to me, Benedict, oh gee, you're not listening to the right players. I don't care. That is a thing that happens with accordions. So I created an LFO that creates a kind of tremolo in it. You don't notice it a lot. If I solo the sound, you're going, ooh, that's a bit wonky. But within the mix, it creates some of the groove that you get with the squeeze box. So there are a couple of the unusual decisions there. Past that, The mix itself came together relatively easily. To get that feel. You'll notice my mixer, as usual, nothing happens here at all. I'll make my mix decisions at the end of the instrument, use a solid gain or something like that if necessary, and most of my volume decisions are here. One shared effect unit, these two are bussed together, and that's it. Commonly all sitting on the same amount, but the string, it doesn't entirely belong in this mix, because if you listen to medieval bowed instruments, they're not really violins, they've got some scary freaky things which I don't really know what they are, but they sound really, there's a reason they call them viols. But I couldn't, in this instance I wasn't getting that sound, and I wanted my string to have a more modern Mozart-y sound to it, in which cases it needed to sit back in the mix to say to the listener, this is more sound effect and feel than a lead instrument. This is a lead instrument, even though this is in the section where we've got the big DX7s, which weren't a massively popular instrument back in 1345, but nonetheless I'm expecting that people will just accept that instrument once they've gone over the surprise, but to not mess up some of the feel too much. So, mix, really simple. The reason I leave these untouched is if I then want to do a fade, if I want to move some of a section through my mix, then I've got these free to automate. Whereas if I've already got this sitting down here or something to get the right mix balance, I need to automate that. I got nowhere to go. Whereas if I've got him there and I need to automate, I've got 12 dB up top and 2.0 down the bottom. So it's easy to automate, it's easy to create volume fades and things like that. Unusual, but that's why you look at my mixing board and think this guy hasn't mixed squat. I've just mixed it somewhere else, because that's how I learned to do it in the good old days of MIDI and multi-timbral instruments. So one device, generally my old Emacs, all my sounds having to be mixed on board through MIDI. So that's why my mixers always look different from everybody else's, because nothing happens here, because it just doesn't happen here. So let's get rid of that. I'm happy with my sequence, I'm happy with my mix, so we can largely make that go away. We'll just leave it so we can see where we're at in the world. That's my instruments, nice and neat, main instruments. Normally my drums and bass will sit on the first rack, but in this case there were more effects than leading, which is not uncommon for me, but because they were really written last, they ended up tacked on the end. So our hand drum group and the CR78 loops. Again, unusual for me for loops. So we come up into our master. I'm always going to check in mono. Now at the moment the mono I'm using to check in is not really right, because it's still stereo. You're going to say to me, but Benish, you can't read. Look, the mono button says mono. It's lit up. You've got only mono. Everything's collapsed. But I bet you're sitting there listening on 2 speakers, which means you've still got between 2 and 4 point stereo. Point meaning point sources. So as in, if you've got a woofer and a tweeter, you've got 2 points firing sound at you. To do mono properly, you should have a single cone speaker. That was the classic Oritone or Horitone. There are various other things. I love this. A little nicer than a 4-inch single cone wide range speaker in a box. You won't get melodic bass in it. You won't get super high clear trebles, but clarity and sense of togetherness in a mix, nothing touches it. But not necessarily practical to mix on, although I have. So mono. Single point source. Sounds terrible to me in headphones. Really wrong. But mix, check your mixes, check your sections. There are issues that when you put both channels over to the one side, the whole mix gets louder. Just sort of be aware of that. But you're not listening for volume here, you're listening to see how cohesive is my mix. Does it sound good when it's collapsed into mono? You're checking to see are those strings that you hyper widened just collapsing and disappearing? No strings at all anymore. Oops, embarrassing, don't want to do that. Been there, done that. But single point means that you're not getting so much of a fake stereo coming back from outputting lots of point sources into the room. You're minimizing the number of point sources that are coming into your room. So one speaker. Of course, it'll sound horrible in a sense. If you're used to this massive sound, it'll sound horrible. It's not about that. Learn to love that mix. So I'm mixing mono. Program-wise, as in the song, really sounds exactly the same. Pull it out into stereo, yes, we've got a sense of things wrapping around. That's mostly the pads in the DX7 type sound. But we don't need them. The music still sounds good without stereo, so that's good. If you can get a great mix in mono, when it comes out into stereo, as long as you haven't got anything badly mixed in stereo, it's just suddenly going to say, oh, we're looking for it sounding really good in mono. If it doesn't sound really good in mono, you've got something wrong with your mix. So we check that. We always check it. We check all our sections. Don't just go, I'll check the most blamin section. Go and check the beginning too. Now there's not much happening in stereo there, I happen to know, but in some cases if you start with an atmospheric beginning, you might have massive amounts of stereo. If you're making hip-hop, which is traditionally quite narrow and muscular, to give a sense of stereo, you might do some really hugely stereo stuff at the beginning to make people think wide. Then you pull into muscular when you're doing that kind of stuff. But check at the beginning, because if you check just the loud bit in mono, it's going to sound fine because it's not very wide in the first place. So check all your sections in mono. So once we're happy with it in mono, we then want to work out what we're going to do to master this track. We should have a good sounding mix. If you do not have a good sounding mix that you are happy with, by good sounding I mean it represents your song. Not that it's blamming and that it's going to sound great in clubs when you're not writing club music. That's really important because I hear so many people thinking, oh, but I have to make my song like it sounds blamming. And it turns out that they're actually writing, you know, ballads or love songs or something, and it's like, that's really messed up. Yes, you've written a ballad with the world's largest 909, but what's a ballad about? Large 909s? I hope you're saying no. I hope you're saying the ballad is about the words tugging at people's heartstrings, making them need to buy more boxes of tissues. In which case that's the element that needs to be up front in your mix. So a master is never about doing anything other than making what the story of your song is more. And in this case, I'd started to mix and I also made a master where I was arse about. That's why I'm picking this one, because it's so unusual. So we'll look at starting to master. For the moment I'm just going to leave this alone. Levels, they're going to come in later. There are various things that we will do, which I'll walk you through, but then I'm going to turn them pretty well all off, because I know I don't want them in this mix. Compressor. Commonly we will start with a compressor. So I'm inserting a compressor, insert compressor here. Let's just grab a section of this track. Should grab a little bit more. There. Loop it. Now when you start to compress stuff, It's easy to wiggle the buttons everywhere and knobs everywhere and go, oh, is this better, is this better, is this better, is this better? No. Bad plan. It's also a terrible plan to open up a plugin that's got presets. Like in this case, we could be opening up some sort of combinator thing going, ooh, where are the good mastering presets? I'll flip through these until I find the good one. You've lost the plot. Do not do this. The presets are there, A, to appease people who don't know how to do it and are too silly to learn. Be that if you want, but it's their marketing, not about making you a better musician. Or really they're there to show you how you might put things together to achieve a certain result. So if you find a preset in here called Blamming Smack My Bitch Up Master, it does not mean that whacking that Blamming Smack My Bitch Up Master on your new age record is going to turn into a Blamming Smack My Bitch Up track. It's merely going to make it too blamming loud. So please, presets are there to give you a sense of how you might learn. Presets are not there to deliver you the result of the name that they have. So I'm going to ignore presets. Off. Oops, wrong one. Off. We will insert a compressor. Now, I am not looking to control master levels here. I am absolutely not looking to control master levels here. You'll see I've started out with a pretty ugly setting. Matter of fact, now sounds like shite. Brilliant. Winning. Be on the dance floor in no time. What I'm looking for is the groove of this piece. Now be aware, as I turn this up, the attack gets slower, the thing gets louder. If you think that's making your piece sound better, you're wrong. Louder is not better. What we're looking for is the groove. Now you'll notice, hopefully, that I actually found it fairly quickly. Let's see if you can spot where it is. I'm going to go back through this. Try and tell me when you found that groove. When you go, ooh, styling. Okay, you probably worked it out before. Hopefully you worked it out. There's something here. So what I'm looking for is that point where the piece starts to get up. Ooh! Doesn't matter whether we've got dance music or funky music or something that's verging on new age like this. There will come a point where the rhythmic part of it, obviously the less rhythmic your music is, the less this is an issue, but most of you are writing very rhythmic music. Therefore, this compressor is not designed to control your levels. This compressor is designed to control dynamics. You're looking to find that point where this compressor helps that piece dance a little bit better. And here, it does that. It's not going to sound massive, because it's not a dance track. Still at 100 to 1, or infinite. Minor, and is not an excellent track to show this technique off, but nonetheless, you see I start with very, very aggressive strategy. No attack, infinity to 1, threshold to nothing. I'm hammering this, but I'm just looking for that groove, that point where it sort of has that little bit of a lift. Once you find that, you're backing right off. At this point, you're only wanting a tiny, tiny bit of flicker, because what this is doing is actually digging holes in your mix. Literally, volume-wise, digging holes in your mix. But if you can have those holes be dug in a way that they emphasize a rhythm, so it's a little like if you've got your drum machine and it's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not the same as when you've got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So what we've done there is we've made the 1 and the 3 a little bit louder. Now we could and should do that in the composition, but in the mastering stage where we're not touching the composition anymore, what we can do is potentially dig little holes in the mix. So 1 comes in and we turn the volume down. 2 comes in, we turn the volume down. So we can help create some of that 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of feel. Just a little bit, just a smidge. If you're hearing those great big lurches like when I'm saying it, you're overdoing it. You are killing your piece. So just that tiny bit, we put a compressor in. Common thing that you will next do is put in an equalizer. Equalizer. Now some of you will be thinking, oh, but Benedict, why aren't you using non-standard devices, because those stock units always suck? No, your ability to use your devices sucks. So learn using your stock units. I will admit that I have learned to use my stock units even better by some third-party devices. So I'm not anti-third-party device at all. I'm going to show you one here and encourage you to buy it because I think it's good if it works for you, if you understand it. However, to say I can only use third-party devices because stock units suck is a seriously dumb proposition because you're limiting yourself. So, the thing that most people will do here is turn up the bass and turn up the treble. Now the reason that the EQ generally comes after the compressor is compression is prone to making a track a little bit dull. Especially some of the older compressors, they were prone to making tracks dull because they're squashing things, they're squashing dynamics. Take something like a string, compress it heavily, and you'll notice that it starts to lose life, it becomes dull. Therefore you want to put more treble back on top of it. Don't compress it as hard in the first place would be my suggestion, but if you have to, you tend to EQ back afterwards. So you're reimposing a curve. Now we're not compressing heavily enough here to really affect that, but it's just quite common when you make a mix and you finalize your mix and say, okay, my mix is good, that you might come along and go, the overall tone of the mix I might want to change. And that's where we commonly come in and put this kind of curve on our music. Sounds like shit, children, sounds like shit. It must be subtle. And it must suit the track. Okay, so what have we got here? Okay, if we're going after a traditional sound, really lovely and bright, there's great big blaze of highs up there off the CR78 and the DX7 type sound. It's like it's like ice cream. Stereo wideners, I really don't like them as a rule. Occasionally I'll use them. As a rule, I don't like them. The other one you'll hear is about mid-side. If you don't know what you're doing, do not use them. So stereo enhancers or mid-size processing. If you do not know what you're doing, do not use them. Because you'll easily make something that sounds very dramatic. And you'll go, wow, I've improved the world, I'm so skilled. Later you'll listen to your piece and go, this sounds mighty fucking weird. Because you've played with something you're not understanding yet. So I'm not going over it. You can do it, be subtle. Really subtle. Like, so subtle it's really almost unnoticeable to AB. Otherwise you're going to come back and you go, that's mighty fucking weird. What's wrong with that mix? I hear mixes sometimes from people and you just go, oh my god. You know, you've wound their stereo out to like 350%. And everything in the middle is just whoop. You've exploded your mix. Don't do it. If you don't know what you're doing, don't do it. Now, part of you might be saying, oh, but if you don't show me how to do it, I'll never know how to do it. I assume you're watching this because you're not exactly all over this bit already. So maybe sometime in the future I'll give you a master guide to how to stereo widen and mid-size process and stuff like that, but not until I feel like most of the stuff I see here in forums with people all over the basics. Okay. So, if at this point we're happy with our overall tone, remember I'm working in cans, so I can barely hear what's going on. So if it sounds terrible, cans. Never work in cans. Especially not $50 ones. They're beard cans, but they're $50 cans. So now, we mostly just want to bring up to the right level. Up to the right level. It's good to know where the loudest part of your mix is, where your piece is. It's not always where you think it is. It's easy to say, oh, well, okay, well, this is the bit with the loudest crap in it, the most stuff going on at once, therefore it's the loudest. You're telling your mix what it's doing. No, your mix will tell you what needs to be done. If your mix is not telling you what needs to be done, you're either not listening to it, because you're being an arrogant prick and going, it'll do what I want it to do, and wondering why it doesn't work. Or there's some other thing wrong. But go through it. You can often find, I commonly find, that pieces that parts of the track that seem a bit more ambient can sometimes actually be the loudest bits. Sometimes it's, I need to go back and compress or limit something a little bit, because it can be a problem, but the natural mix will sometimes be louder. So please don't assume, check all your sections. For now I'm using this bit because I know broadly from having worked with this piece that that's good enough and it's easier to work with for now. Now, I'm looking at this number here. This is Select Gain. It's about $19, 20 bucks. Well worth it. I'm not into, there are other volume meters and what have you out there. They're all trillions of numbers and stuff. I'm not a numbers guy. I know some people mix only by numbers. I'm not a fan of that, and I will discourage that, especially when you're learning. That's the time when you think, oh, I need the numbers, otherwise I don't know what's going on. No, you need your ears and you need your brain. And if once you start looking at numbers, the creative part of your brain actually switches off. It leaves the building completely, leaving you with nothing but numbers. Is there any set of numbers that I could put together realistically that would equal Gene Simmons on I Was Made for Loving You? or ABBA on Dancing Queen. No, there isn't. 28 times 47 is not going to give us Smells Like Nirvana. Forget the numbers. They're going to do you a lot of harm. Engage your brain. It can be useful. Now, I learnt, and I considered even going through this, not even showing you any numbers at all. I will show you that method quickly. There is the method. That's basically it. To listen to your piece, you use your ears. Hard with cans. Matter of fact, I'm turning this down. You will have been working probably with your volume knob high. Not too high. If it's a jet airplane, rock guitar, concert volumes, turn it the fuck down. Which is exactly the quote from my book. You cannot mix with it really loud. You not only make yourself tired, but your ears close down. Your ears are actually compressing. So what you're hearing is already compressed, which means you're not hearing what's going to the master at all. And that's why when you listen to it back, you go, that sounds wrong. What went wrong with my mix? You went wrong with your mix because you're listening to it so fucking loud you can't even hear it. Turn it down. But you will naturally mix a bit louder, but it shouldn't be much louder than the volume that you would normally listen to a fun record. Maybe not if you're listening to a new age record that's quiet in the background so you can hear the ducks outside. You're going to be mixing out the volume that you would be listening to Nirvana or Boston sing about how they have more than a feeling and stuff like that. It's rousing, but it's not enough to take your head off. Okay. As you start to get into the territory where you're mastering, as in you're turning the volume up here, sorry, and in camera, as you're turning up the volume on your limiter here, your final mix, turn your system volume down. You can't see it, but I've got my balance here, and I'll turn my volume down so that my volume will now be where I put my volume knob when I'm listening to music. Gary Newman, yep, volume knob's there. Gary Allen, yep, volume knob's there. My new track, yep, volume knob's there. That's referencing, self-referencing. I don't feel the need to actually put on my Gary Allen, my Gary Newman, my Alan Parsons to compare it to my record. Do it if you have to, but I think it's better to do those things, do those references. Get used to your speakers and get used to your system. Kill aliens whilst you're doing it, but get used to your system, and then when you're working your mixes, your brain just naturally goes, oh, that's the position. This is muscle memory. So I will turn my speaker, my monitors down, because never mix in these. Definitely never master in them. So what I've done here, we'll run back through exactly what I did. That's it. You'll notice that this just starts to blip. That's it. Now what I've just done is I've gone from soft clip, which what soft clip does is that everything's coming through in real time, and some things the limiter just can't get in time, because the laws of physics means that you can't be ahead of time. Everything takes time to do. So soft clip actually is an emulation of what happens in the real world when an amplifier or something has to do more than it can do. It shaves the edges off. So that stops me, as I said at the beginning, sending stuff off into my masters. I don't love to use that on the end. It can be creative and it can be great, but I'll explain why I don't. I'll turn that off and I'll put 4 milliseconds look ahead. You can have that on whilst you're writing, but just understand you've created 4 milliseconds of lag. Press key, lag. So press key, there's another 4 milliseconds on top of whatever your system latency is. Generally you don't like that, so you're playing and you find your playing is getting out of time because you're hearing everything back and you're adjusting. Messy. So put it into 4 milliseconds. Look ahead mode, that means that the audio is played ahead of what you're hearing, and the computer, the software, the DSP, is able to say, ooh, we were going to have a peak there that was outside of what we'd be able to deal with, but we can deal with it because we're seeing it in advance. It's just creating like a little pre-look type thing. Plain and simple, I've turned up the input gain, I've driven this mix harder, turned up the volume of the mix, so that I'm getting just a flicker here. Some of you like to master real hard. Depends where you sit in the loudness war. I'm not a big fan of it. Let's look at my mix here. Okay, they're right where I want them to be. We could go a little harder. Let's just... I honestly don't like it up there. The piece is just starting to sound too loud, too flattened, hammered, death magnetic. It doesn't suit the piece. Do what suits your piece, but what we're looking at here is that my peak is up in the 0 dB level, and my RMS, peak, RMS. So peak is at 0, RMS is at -12, which also happens to be 0 VU. So what that tells us if we had dynamic range in our mix. If we're talking loudness war, turn my hands down. Sounds gruesome. It's louder. Much louder, but it sounds gruesome. The music itself is just destroyed. If we were to run through some of this more subtle stuff through, awful, just truly awful. We've made it louder. But was your aim in life to write the loudest song ever? Probably not. Your aim was probably to write a song that made people need to buy new tissues, or made people want to throw shapes on the floor, or made them something, but you probably didn't want to say, well, that's the fucking loudest fucking song I've ever fucking heard. Metallica tried it. It's called Death Magnetic. Don't go there. So, allow that kind of space, and you're set. Now, output gain. If you're eagle eye, you may have noticed that this isn't quite at 0. So why am I shaving off some of my output when I'm trying to get as much as possible? The reason is that we're working in the digital domain, and for people to hear it in their ears, analog domain. So you need, there is going to be a digital to analog converter involved in this process somewhere. Now if you're in control of everybody's digital to analog processor, you might be able to run a 0 dB, but you're not. The moment you're going to put this on YouTube or somewhere like that, their process is actually going to alter what you've done. Not in a bad way. Get it? There's this whole SoundCloud or YouTube ruin my mix out of your head, because if they ruined your mix was fucked in the first place. They've just helped you to know it. They've done you a favor. Go learn to mix better. And keep putting them up on YouTube until they sound right. If you're getting upset because they sound different, then you need to get your head screwed on right. Everywhere will sound different. And that's part of the joy of being a mix engineer. How to build something that sounds at least okay everywhere. If you're really good, it's going to sound good everywhere. Then you're probably called Mutt Lange or Alan Parsons or maybe Andrew Sheps or whatever. That's your aim. If you're going to get bent out of shape because it sounds different, get out of this game. So we do not want to run a full bandwidth 0 dB up against a digital to analog converter, because while some will do it just fine, normally the mid-range ones, the ones that cost a bit more than a penny but quite a bit less than 10 grand each, they might handle that fine. But I know that YouTube's algorithm doesn't. Some of the digital converters that cost about 4 cents each, they will not handle that. They will just go as soon as they hit that bit. Now that bit may only be 1 sample long, but they're still going to go, and that's what you've just put into the person's ears. Will they thank you for it? No. Will they go, oh, that person didn't realise this, I've just got this world's shittiest DA converter, my fault? No. Because they don't know anything about this stuff at all. They'll just go, that fucked. That dick can't mix. So, back it off. Now the other problem is, and you might think I'm writing the most purest, pristinest, classical or Supertramp out there, and the only people listening to my stuff are audiophiles. None of my fans spend any less than 10 grand on their digital audio converter. Guess what? Quite a fair percentage of really, really expensive digital to analog converters will not handle a full 0 dB bit. They will go, and those people will be even less cool about you making their system go. So it's easy fix. Wherever the last bit in your chain is, shave off 0.2 or 0.3 of a dB. I normally try and shave off 0.3, but I'm offered here between 2.2 and 0.4. Doesn't much matter. Take that much off, which means that your music never hits the top of the tin, and by never hitting the top of the tin, it's very unlikely to distort on somebody's laptop. YouTube will do it every time. I don't know why, they just do it. I don't see it as a fault in their process. It's a fault in my process if I don't allow for it. Some really expensive audiophile stuff, whether it's waves or MP3s or FLAC, it doesn't matter, they'll still just. But the really, really scary one for a lot of you guys who are writing EDM-y or homies type stuff is that somebody listening on their Kenwood head unit with a Sony sub in the back of their car, that hits their digital analog converter, doesn't handle it properly. You have just launched their subwoofer into low orbit. Do they thank you? Are they impressed? No, not at all. It won't make them want to buy more of your records. So, very simple. Roll off 0.2 or 0.3 of a dB on whatever your final out is. If I were wanting to use the soft clip here, I might drive a little bit of stuff into it, and then I would pull out another one of my lovely Sally Gaines. Now what I'm going to do is wind it back. So let's say I was hear how it gets furry. That's what soft clip does. It's saturation, it makes things furry. At the very beginning, it can make them a little bit brighter and a little bit more gelled together, like a record from the 60s. Can be lovely. I'm not always convinced about wanting to use it at this point in the mix, not at the very last point. But if you do want to use it, by all means go for it, hammer it, so long as it sounds lovely and doesn't distort, and then take off your 0.3 of a dB after that before you're hitting somebody's digital analog converter. So that is mastering. I've covered a lot. The video is a lot longer than you wanted it to be. But that's mastering. Now I'm going to cover a different device. I'm going to undo what I've done because I actually don't like it. I already know I don't like it because I've been there. I'm actually going to run a lot of my process off this section, because this to me is the heart of this track. See, I'm back not worrying about levels. I've got my look ahead so nothing's going to blow. I'm going to show you this wee device. This is pretty new. It's been out a couple of days. SKP, the Sugar Q Sweetening Equalizer. Drag that so he's first in the chain. This is a Baxendall EQ. So an EQ in most musicians' devices looks like this. A high shelf looks like this. Often quite a bit like this. See how the gain's there, and it's fairly fast. And as a result of the laws of physics, sometimes it makes a little bit of a drop there. Baxendall looks more like this. Yes, we could emulate it with this device, but there's a reason we're not going to, because it's not quite going to sound the same. There's a different type of theory to this. So it's all about subtle, and it does sound different from M-Class. If I had a sound in my Sugar Q, I could then come very close to emulating it with M-Class, but it's not going to be quite the same. It's one of the few times where I'm going to say, this device is different, and that's cool. That's when you buy that device, if it's of use to you. I beta tested this, so I didn't buy it. If I'd just downloaded it and tried it for 10 seconds on Thor or something, I would have gone, this is the most useless piece of crap I've ever encountered. What was he thinking? And I did give some of that feedback to Nick early in the process. What's the point of this? He then explained to me about what it is and why it's a thing. These styles of high and low shelves are what's commonly found in good quality hi-fis, because they are considered the most musical sounding. It means that they sound weak when we apply them to a Thor or a bass guitar or something like that, but when we apply them to a mix, we can apply a small amount and end up with a real sweetening of the area that we're working with. So the features are, it's got a high pass, so we can roll off our low frequencies. It doesn't go super high, but that's enough to be practical. They're presets, but it doesn't really matter. Sometimes it's nice to have a set of 8 choices or whatever the number is, rather than having 358. We've then got a low shelf, which is, as I've just told you, exactly the same as the way it works on your stereo. You're making a smiley face, or a frowny face if you're trying to get rid of stuff. But basically that's what you're doing. You can choose at which point cutoff happens, and then how much. Again, I initially thought 5 dB, are you kidding me? I want at least 15 before we're even starting to be friends, buddy there, Nick. But then, once I understood what it was about, this is not meant to be put on a Thor, although I have done it. Once it got the new version, I have done it, and I got some fun with it, but that's secondary. High gain's exactly the same, so we've got a high shelf boost and the ability to roll off our high ends. So, now I know that's what we all want to do straight away. We sort of divorce our brain from the actual music and just listen to the sound, and we go, oh, I got more welly, I got more tiz and ting up the top, especially when I come to hitting my CR78s. Yep. But that's just dumb. That's just using presets, and I was pretty vocal about that before. So let's not do that. Let's be really subtle, which I can't on these cans. Okay, my music basically sounds the way that it did before, but there's just this tiny sort of thing. I'm not looking to change the way of my mix sounds. So get that off my face, great big yellow blob. I'm not looking to change the way my mix sounds. If I think my mix sounds wrong, I'll go back to my mix, which I have done in this instance a couple of times. I want that medieval sound to come out, so medieval sound is not going to sound like Metallica or Justice or whoever. It's not going to sound like that. It's going to sound like, you know, medieval stuff. So I want to keep that very natural sounding. So subtle. I might well even roll off a bit here, because we're not looking for massive amounts of, because it's not part of it. If I want to warm my mix up, especially if I'm working somewhere like here, let's say now I'm not saying that's necessarily good, because again I can't really hear in these things. But you see how I've warmed the mix up. This will just gradually roll off some of those really high frequencies which just didn't exist till a couple of years ago. They were up there, but you didn't hear them at the intensity in which you hear them these days on a modern mix. So I'll quite commonly roll off a little bit. If you listen to AM radio, you're probably hearing nothing above 7, maybe nothing above 5. And good AM radio sounds gorgeous. So don't think that you need bass or treble for music to sound good. You absolutely don't. You would be looking at probably both of those rolled off. With that reference, that's kind of AM radio, and it's not sounding bad at all. I put that in mono, but I think that's going to sound really quite nice. Matter of fact, let me just try that. I can hear all the elements of my mix. It's got this really nice, warm, engaging feel to it. So don't be afraid to roll stuff off. Don't be afraid to say, I don't actually need those frequencies or lots of decibels of gain, because you don't. Okay, back to our bright mix. So quite subtle here, because if I go boosting the bass and treble too much in this section, I lose my medieval feel. Now this fella has another feature. It's called Mojo over here. I don't know 100% what Mojo does, but it does something, and what it does is kind of cool. And then the way it works in with these is even cooler. So in the first half, it's using saturation. We talked about that here, where you can turn your mix up and then start to burr the edges, make them start to get furry. So it's doing a little bit of saturation into this. It doesn't have an input drive or level knob. We did talk about that, but we were running out of knob spaces, and this is the solution that Nick came up with, and I think a great solution. So the first half of it's just adding a little bit of saturation. The second half, he's not telling me what it does. I'm not asking what it does. There's something to do with so many secret herbs and spices, but it sounds good. So let's do it on the beaty stuff, because that's what you expect. Now, hopefully, you're hearing how the waist of that mix suddenly thickens up. He's doing something or other with EQ. How it's doing it, I don't know. Don't really care. Sounds good. Not always, and that was one of the issues in an early version of this, and I made a video about it, which is not on the internet. You didn't have enough control, so if you threw a lot of level at this, it just went blah, really ugly, because it wasn't designed for that. And by talking about it, he realized, yes, here's the solution. Rather than giving a straight input knob and no control over the amount of Mojo, he said, okay, you can handle your inputs with a select gain, or something like that. You can use a maximizer, use a compressor, anything that can change the gain on the way in, and then you can control your Mojo amount here. I think I really like where that's going, with the way that changes this part of the mix. And for me, remember, that's pivotal, the sort of medieval sound that it's got. That's what this track's about. Now the thing that I notice is the combination of when you've got Mojo happening, and particularly the treble boost, it's more noticeable here. How it works, I don't know and don't want to know. Is that there are little moments where things just go spring out of the top of that mix. That's lovely. It's not magic, there's some science in this. And Nick knows what it is. If he wants to write it up, good on him. But for me, it's very, very subtle. So if you're just looking to flatten everything as pancake as you can, you're probably not going to notice these things, because lots of limiting is going to kill them. But there are moments that just go spring. To me, that's quite magical. That adds a sense of dynamic and interest. Because in the real world, when you're standing there, you're moving around, and suddenly a frequency is a little bit louder than another. This has a way of pulling some of those up at times, in particularly the high end of the mix. The low end may well be doing it too, but you don't hear it as clearly. But everything warms up and becomes kind of exciting. So I like what this has done. So we're left now just to do what we did before, only we're going to do it with gain. Obviously that's not an exhaustive going through the track, but you see the same idea as to what I did before, only rather than turning my input gains up here, I've used select gain to do it here. I've got more precision, and that's one of the advantages of his device. He built it to have more precision. He didn't like how imprecise a lot of the stock Reason devices were. Very functional, very, very functional, but he wanted more precision. And this is very nice, you've got more precision. Plus, without going crazy and giving you millions of pedantic bits of information that turn your brain off, it just gives you the one number. This is where we're at. It's kind of rounded off, so it's not super space shuttle accurate. We use that to fire a space shuttle at the moon, we'll probably miss the moon. But it doesn't matter, because it's not what it's about. It will just give us reasonably where those peaks are. And they will somewhat correspond with this as well. So that just allows me to run with it with a little bit more finesse, tiny bit more confidence, and there we go. I would have checked my whole track, but you don't need to hear me go through that. I've still made sure that I've got my output at just off blowing up DA converters, and export Sona's audio file. It is as simple as that. Now I know this is a long video, but we'll run basically what we walk through what we did. You'll see that in the end, that even though there are drums and what have you in this piece, my master consists of a little bit of saturation, and whatever that Mojo does, a smidge of very subtle EQ. We could ignore this device. Effectively all I've done is just replaced this volume knob here, this level knob, volume levels. I have used it for mono, to check in mono. If I do that right now it's too loud, but that's why I've used it, but otherwise it doesn't even have to be there. So my mastering chain, we could realistically say, was a little bit of EQ into a maximizer. You know what it was before I used digital audio workstations, and I've listened to a lot of my mixes recently because I've uploaded a whole lot of stuff. It was this, one limiter. That's all you need to do to master. If there are problems that you come up with in your mix, go back to your mix. A lot of what you hear about people doing fancy things in mastering is where they've been sent the track and they don't have access to the mix to fix the mix. So any kind of black magic being done in the mastering is because they've been sent a mix that sucks. There are other things that a really high-end mastering engineer might do, and he's knowing more about the formats he's putting it into. He might make a different master for vinyl than he does for CD. He might even supply the record company different masters to go into the digital domain. So that's your Spotify and that kind of stuff. But the differences are, don't worry about it. By the time you get to that point, you're paying somebody else to do it. Don't waste your time. A true professional doesn't waste his time learning to do things that he's not good at doing. A true professional says, how much does it cost? Is it worth it? Yep, brilliant, let's do this. And it's done. Only an amateur sits around going, oh, I have to know how to do it so I know that I'm not being ripped off so that I can get a better price and pay somebody else $2 when the going rate's $200. Grow up. If you want to act like a professional, think like a professional from the beginning. This is all you need to do in terms of mastering your stuff. Make a really good mix. If you've got problems in your mastering, your mix is wrong. If you've got problems hearing it in your friend's car, your mix is wrong. If you've got problems with it translating on YouTube, your mix is wrong. If you've got problems, your mix is wrong. Mastering, you're just getting the levels up, making sure you're not going to blow up somebody's digital analog converter, maybe sweetening or finessing the tone of the mix slightly. Sometimes I might do things like rolling off low end. If it's a bit too, which I have actually done some of in this mix, but I've done it in the mix more than here. And when I can hear on proper speakers, I may change what I've done here. This was only an example to show you, using material outside of what you'd normally think. So I hope that helps. Really simple, really effective. Get rid of presets, get rid of everything else. Focus on the thinking that I've given you here, and then you can put your effort into mixing where it belongs. Get your tracks working, they're loud enough, move on. Thank you, I hope that helps.